Bible study. So glad that you are here with us this morning as we are continuing on through the book of Nehemiah. And actually, we are concluding the book of Nehemiah today. You have made it through. Now, if you did not join us the entire way through the study, or you want to go back and start from the very beginning, or invite others to be a part of the journey, then all of this is archived and you can find information on how to be a part of that and access that right there at the bottom of your screen. Go.christtable.today/reconstruct. And we invite you to do that. It's been a crazy ride through the book of Nehemiah, and it ends with a bang, let me tell you. If you'd like to find out more about Christ's Table, then you can visit that URL right there. Go to that website, www.christtable.today. We offer these Bible studies free of charge out of the goodness of our heart, but it takes finances and resources in order to do that. And so we thank you for your participation and consideration for financially donating to us. You can do that right there at that website, christtable.today. And in our generosity, we want to be generous back to those who are generous to us. And so we send spiritual resources through the mail every 2 or 3 months to you in order to help you on your spiritual journey. And we thank you for doing that. Today, we find ourselves on day 32, the last and final day here in Nehemiah chapter 13, verses 23 through 31. Now, it has been a ride through the book of Nehemiah, but one of the things that we have really realized, I think, through this is that not every person in the Bible is a hero. Not every story is a hero story. And oftentimes, those Sunday school lessons about people in the Bible, you go back and you read those stories as adults and you think, this is, at worst, a lot more complex than I thought it was. And at best, this person isn't a good person at all. I didn't realize all of this went on. Samson is one of those. If you've never gone back and read the Samson story as an adult, let me tell you, it's crazy. And Nehemiah is one of those as well. And I think, at the end of the story here, it's important for us to also be fair and not be too unreasonable. Sometimes I think that we can hold other individuals accountable in ways that we don't hold ourselves accountable. We do that oftentimes maybe with our religious leaders, with our political leaders, with spiritual people who are in our lives and churches. And we do that oftentimes, I think, with biblical characters as well. We expect perfection out of others whenever we don't expect perfection out of ourselves. And so I think that there is a necessity, a need for us to not over expect out of any individual. These are all human beings, even though they're in the Bible. But I think, too, that we can also look at them and say, these are individuals that I don't think got it. I think could have done better. I think should have done better. And I think it's okay for us to come at Scripture with those thoughts. Not everybody in the Bible is a hero. And Nehemiah has had a few high points, but has also had a few low points. And this chapter 13 is certainly at the top of the low points. The top of the low points. So why don't we back up and begin with our last verse in yesterday's study, because Nehemiah's prayers throughout the book have been instructive to us and also have been kind of surprising to us in ways that kind of helped us to see that Nehemiah really just didn't seem to have a healthy relationship with God or an understanding of God at all. And sometimes that happens. People are thrust into positions of leadership that are beyond their spiritual maturity. And that is why it is so unbelievably important for us to always be working on our spiritual maturity, or if we are thrust into a situation where we are inadequate, to allow that to drive us more deeply into adequacy rather than just survive and get by. And Nehemiah seems to just kind of survive and get by. We have no inclination that Nehemiah really works on his spiritual life. We have no indication that Nehemiah goes to the temple and worships and practices. Maybe he did, and we don't have it on record. And we've also said being likely a eunuch because he was a cupbearer for the king of Persia, he probably wasn't allowed in the worshiping community. And so he is trying to give a gift to other people that he himself cannot fully enjoy. So then I commanded the Levites to purify themselves and to guard the gates in order to preserve the holiness of the Sabbath. Remember, and this is his prayer, remember this good deed also, oh my God, have compassion on me according to your great and unfailing love. And Nehemiah, as we've said, seems to have these pattern of praying for favor for things that were not favorable, for asking for God to give him good blessing for good deeds that were not good deeds. And that's, you can frame it as that. You can put lipstick on a pig, but at the end of the day, it still stinks. And that's kind of, I think, what's happening here oftentimes in Nehemiah's prayer. So into today's reading. About the same time, now Nehemiah has, in this chapter alone, he kicked out the storeroom, kicked Tobiah out of the storeroom, the storage there, got physical, removed everything from the storage rooms himself, then went and disallowed any activity on the Sabbath, closed the gates. Not even foreigners were allowed to be present or be involved in any activities on the Sabbath. And so about the same time, so it's referencing back earlier to what we've read over the last couple of days, about the same time I realized that some of the men of Judah had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. And this should be a red flag to us because Nehemiah has been explicitly clear about his desire that Israel should be pure. Over half of the book of Nehemiah has been discussing through genealogies, through the return of people from exile, the true Israel or the pure Israel, those people who may lay claim to being purely, truly, completely holy Israelite, without any shadow of doubt, without any mixing in the bloodlines, without having practiced other religions, or without even there being a question of it. So it had to be provable, which in those days, how did you prove in those days without genetic testing, without great records? A lot of it was hearsay and assumption. And if we just didn't like you or didn't think that you were a pure, true Israelite, then you were out. Furthermore, half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod or of some other people and could not speak the language of Judah at all. And so what we're seeing here is a purity issue in families intermarrying. There is indication in the Bible that God was opposed to this during the time of the writing of the Mosaic Law, but it also doesn't seem to have been a decree for all people, for all times, for all tribes. There are some that God specifically says, don't do this with for these reasons at that time, but it's not a blanket statement. In fact, Ruth marries Moabites. The whole story of Ruth. Ruth would not have been allowable in this pure Israel that Nehemiah is promoting here and trying to create. So this intermarriage, Nehemiah confronts them. He calls down these men a curse upon them, which is really, it's really serious. It's hard for us to understand what that was like. It'd be like, you know, I just can't even think of a comparison. Preaching their funeral, imploring upon God to destroy them and heap destruction on them, and they believed in a God who was actively evolved in those ways, and so there is an expectation that if somebody like Nehemiah called down curses on other people, that those things would likely come true. I beat some of them. It gets, again, we're seeing the physical now, not just violently physical, but now we're seeing physically violent. beat them, pulled out their hair, made them swear in the name of God that they would not let their children intermarry with the pagan people of the land. This isn't a story that is often told. People stop well before these chapters in their teaching of Nehemiah. And if they do talk about these, then they kind of equate it to Jesus flipping over the tables, that it was righteous anger, that it was justified because of what had happened. Well, it wasn't, unless you're also going to justify pulling out Boaz's and Ruth's hair and beating them and calling down curses upon them. And those stories are previous to Nehemiah. Ruth has already lived and died. Boaz has already lived and died by the time we get to this point in Nehemiah. And so those stories were part of the framework of what we have here with Nehemiah. I made them swear in the name of God that they would not let their children intermarry with the pagan people of the land. Wasn't this exactly what led King Solomon of Israel into sin? I demanded. There was no king from any nation who could compare to him, and God loved him and made him king over all of Israel, but even he was led into sin by his foreign wives. How could you even think of committing this sinful deed and acting unfaithfully toward God by marrying foreign women? And so doesn't stop there. One of the sons of Jodai, son of Elishib, the high priest, had married a daughter of Sanballat, and Sanballat now makes a return. Tobiah and Sanballat have been in the story from the very beginning, and there was no love lost between Nehemiah and Sanballat. But the high priest's son has married a daughter of Sanballat, so banishes the high priest from his presence. Remember them, O my God, for they have defiled the priesthood and the solemn vows of the priests of the Levites. So I purged out everything foreign and assigned tasks to the priests of the Levites, making certain that each knew his work. And I also made sure that the supply of wood for the altar and the first portions of the harvest were brought at the proper times. It's almost as though, let's move on. I've completely removed this priest and anything connected to this high priest because his son had the audacity to marry this guy that I don't like's daughter. And, well, now that that's done, let's make sure we've got wood for the altar and that the harvest is brought in at the proper times. Remember this in my favor, oh my God. And thus ends the book of Nehemiah, with prayer, asking God for him to be remembered with favor after violent acts against those who, in his mind, were impure. You can do the right thing in the wrong way and still be completely wrong having done it. If we want to, for the sake of argument, say that what Nehemiah was doing here in cleansing was right, I think we can still, without a shadow of a doubt, say that Nehemiah over and again in this chapter, and maybe even throughout the entire book, does things really in the wrong way. He's an ends justify the means kind of guy. And if the Bible teaches us anything, that is certainly one of the primary things that the Bible teaches, is that the ends do not justify the means. The journey in which we take to get to a place is as important, if not more important, than the destination itself. You can do the right thing in the wrong way and be completely wrong in having done it, and should not have done it at all because of the way that you did it. Now, I would suggest that here with Nehemiah, not only has he done the thing in the wrong way, but the thing itself was not to have been done. Because as we have said over and again, God has been moving towards inclusion, not exclusion. God has said in Isaiah chapter 2 and in multiple other places that he essentially is superseding the Mosaic law and its restrictions by decreeing that his desire is that every nation, every tribe, every tongue, that all peoples would see Jerusalem as a place to come and worship, and that they would come and have opportunity to come to the temple and do so. And Nehemiah says no. Nehemiah says, we will not have foreigners worshiping with us, worshiping our God. But not just foreigners. We will not have any impure Israelites. That we're getting a very World War II, Hitler, pure Aryan feeling here with this. I don't know that I want to compare Nehemiah to Hitler, but there's some similarities and desires here that are leading them in paths that could be in parallel. Purity against what God has asked. So I would suggest that Nehemiah has neither done things rightly or done the right things. And that's sad, but that also can be instructive to us, especially because throughout this book, what we've also seen is that, and I think that this is one of the primary issues that we've now come to recognize about Nehemiah, is Nehemiah is trying to roll back the clock 700 years. Nehemiah is trying to return to the Mosaic law, to a time where it was just the Jewish people, and they had a stranglehold on God to which nobody else was able to be a part of, and that they knew who were the good Israelites, who were the good Jews, and they knew who the bad Israelites, who the bad Jews were. And it came down to how you participated in the sacrificial system, how you participated in the worshiping community, and how pure you were in other ways, such as marriage. And so Nehemiah tries to roll back the clock 700 years and hold everyone accountable to a very fundamentalist way of doing things, and yet not just holding to the laws on record from 700 years ago, but going far beyond the laws and what they required as well. And it is Nehemiah's undoing. And with this, the book ends with a prayer and a request of favor from God for the things that he has done for God. Now, I will leave it up to you to decide whether or not you think that God answered that prayer or how God answered that prayer. And I think how you interpret Nehemiah's actions and God's reflecting on those actions is going to determine how you answer that question. Now, maybe I'm wrong. And that's a possibility. And if so, that's okay. And if you think so, that's okay. But I hope that at the end of the day, this entire study of Nehemiah has encouraged you to reframe some of the ways in which we think of things, and to feel okay with looking through different lenses at stories that have been told in the same way for many years. And no matter where we come down on the story of Nehemiah, all of our prayers are that, I hope, God would remember us with favor in the things that we have done. But may we all be careful of the things that we do for God and ensure that they are in alignment with what God has asked us to do and with God's heart as has been revealed to us. Turning back the clock 700 years to a more fundamentalist way of doing things may seem right on the surface, and yet Nehemiah leaves a wake of destruction behind him in so doing, and actually prevents God's vision from coming true in almost every decision that he made. And that's disappointing. It's been great to be with you. Until the next study.